This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there, welcome to this edition of Global Business Africa. In the course of the hour, we'll run through all the business news stories you need to know about from Africa and beyond. Let's start with a run through equities markets for you. So Egypt's EGX 30 is the worst performing index among the ones that we do track here on the program. It's down by nearly 28% so far in the year. Nairobi's NSE 20 isn't far behind, 25% in the red. South African indices started May on the back foot, with bank stocks being the biggest losers over there. The bank index was actually down by over 6% in trading today. This pandemic notwithstanding, Vodacom South Africa's commercial 5G network is now live in 3 cities down there. Mobile network traffic has gone up by 40% during the country's 5-week lockdown. Here's what's coming up tonight. Nigeria, Africa's largest economy and Africa's largest oil producer, eases lockdown restrictions. Kenya Airways converts its grounded passenger planes into cargo freighters. And Italy is also emerging from its longest ever economic lockdown. So then let's start the hour in Nigeria. Authorities in Africa's biggest oil producer have started to gradually ease restrictions imposed to slow down the spread of COVID-19. For over a month now, movement and commercial activity in many parts of the country have been deeply limited. CGTN's Phil Ihaza starts us off from the nation's capital, Abuja.
Government offices and businesses like banks have been permitted to resume operations for 5 hours daily. Now, security personnel have also been tasked with monitoring public and private offices to ensure they maintain good hygiene, like hand washing, the frequent use of hand sanitizers and face masks, as well as enforcing physical distancing. President Muhammadu Buhari, in a broadcast last week, directed that starting from Monday, May 4th, a nationwide curfew will begin from 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. daily. He's also banned movement across states, except for essential workers like medical practitioners, and directed that schools and other forms of social or religious gatherings remain closed indefinitely. However, the Nigerian Medical Association has warned that the easing of the lockdown is premature and could trigger complacency among Nigerians, which could increase the spread of coronavirus in the country. According to Buhari, the reason for easing the lockdown is to reduce the heavy economic burden the country is facing and to allow citizens to earn a living while the government curbs the spread of COVID-19. Phil Ihaza, CGTN, Abuja.
All right, and so let's get the latest on what Nigeria is like at the moment with CGTN's Deji Badmus. So Deji, walk us through what the streets of Lagos were like today in terms of people on the street and commercial activity. Are we seeing social distancing requirements being adhered to, especially with public transport?
Not exactly, Ramah. Social distancing is still a very huge challenge here, and a lot of us expected it, and that's the way it turned out. So social distancing is still a problem, but in terms of the compliance with the use of face mask, a lot of people complied. A lot of people use the face mask, but social distancing a very huge challenge. Of course, the traffic jams returned to Lagos today. People actually poured out. Banks were jammed. As a matter of fact, very difficult even to use ATM machines. So, and we had cases of people actually collapsing on the line while waiting to use ATMs or go into the bank. So, of course, not all the offices open. Some people are still taking that precaution not to open completely. But most shops, of course, were open. The informal sector, most especially, everyone was out and about. And of course, it's over now because it ends at 3 p.m. That's when markets are supposed to close, 3 p.m. And then at 8 p.m. the curfew begins. So everyone, as we speak, Ramah, is rushing home now to beat the deadline for the curfew.
Indeed. So walk us through, though, how these restrictions are being eased over the next 6 weeks, because this is not an immediate process. What kind of data will the government be looking out for in order to decide whether to ease restrictions further or to reimpose them?
the government will be looking at the number of cases on a daily basis. As you know, Rama, for the past 2 or 3 weeks, or 2 weeks, I should say now, the cases have actually been going up. They've been going up on a daily basis. And that's the reason why some people actually expressed that worry when the government announced it was going to, begin this partial easing. So the government will basically be looking at the figures. The governor made that clear when he addressed the media yesterday. He said, look, if there was this, very huge spike now in the number of confirmed cases, then the state government, I'm talking about Lagos State, even the federal government, as a matter of fact, may be forced to reimpose a full lockdown. But nobody expects that to happen. So the government will be watching very closely now that number of confirmed cases. So after the test every day, the numbers now will come out. I think the government will want to look at the numbers over the next 1 week and then decide the next course of action. Of course, if the numbers come down, then the government will move to the next phase of the easing now. And that's what the governor made very clear in his press briefing. Rama?
So businesses, as you mentioned, allowed to reopen if, though, they have decontaminated the premises and they've made provisions for social distancing and provided stations for either regular hand washing and sanitation. But will they have to be recertified by local authorities in order to open again?
Not exactly, Rama. At least I did not see that. And as a matter of fact, I can tell you, Rama, that not all businesses actually decontaminated. It's just the truth. That's one guideline that will be very difficult to implement, because if you actually want offices to decontaminate, especially among the informal businesses now, it means you will have to send probably sanitary officers around the city to do some kind of monitoring. I did not see that. Or what we have seen is that the government, sanitary officers actually decontaminate markets and some other public places. But in terms of personal offices, when individuals are supposed to take responsibility, that I did not see. And nothing like, recertification before the business can be allowed to open. So it's all left to the individuals who run their personal businesses now, or personal offices, but there's no monitoring. And if there's no monitoring, it's difficult to see how you could have a recertification now. Rama?
Indeed. One last question for you, Deji. So far smaller economies with a lot less resources to work with have tested more COVID-19 samples than Nigeria has. So Rwanda, for example, right next door here in East Africa, they've tested over 33,000. Kenya's tested over 20,000. But Nigeria, by the 3rd of May, had only tested about 17,500 samples. So what is it that's holding back Nigeria from running more tests? I mean, surely with its population of 200 million, it needs to be running a much higher test rate.
Well, 17,000 is close to 20,000, but that's a joke. Now, Rama, look, this is the issue. It boils down to two things: capacity and turnaround time. I mean, this issue came up during the Presidential Task Force on COVID-19 briefing earlier today, and the NCDC, the head of the NCDC was asked that question. He did talk about the issue of capacity and turnaround time. Now, capacity, when COVID-19 got to Nigeria had just 2 laboratories that could test maybe, say, less than 500 in a day. Now, what we have seen over time, that situation continued for a while, and then the capacity was built up. Today, as we speak, at the last count, we have about 18 laboratories, molecular laboratories now, that could test for COVID-19, and we understand that the total number of tests has actually gone up. That's the number of tests that these 18 laboratories can do is about 3,000. But of course, they are not doing up to 3,000. And part of the reason is because of the turnaround time. Now, we have 36 states in the country. About 34 states are currently affected by COVID-19. So you have cases in all of the states. Now, not all these 34 states have laboratories because, as I said, we have just 18. Now, for those states that do not have laboratories, it means you'll have to take samples there. The samples will have to either be sent to Abuja or to the states where you have laboratories. So that turnaround time, it takes a lot of time, and that's the reason why we're not getting this huge number of tests. Besides, look, Rama, the truth is that there's also a shortage of manpower in terms of the experience now. I'm talking about the molecular biologists, for instance. You need to run these laboratories. Even where you have them, they still need to be trained in the handling of COVID-19 cases. I think that's the problem Nigeria is having to deal with. Training is going on at the moment. Capacity is being built. And what we've been told is that the aspiration is to have laboratories, molecular laboratories now in all 36 states of the country, and push the country's testing capacity to around 30,000. That's what the NCDC chairman has said, over the next 2 or 3 months. So we'll wait and see how that happens. But for now, it's a challenge, no doubt about it. Nigeria will need to increase the number of its molecular laboratories. And of course, the turnaround time needs to be worked on. That has to be sorted out as well.
Indeed. We'll leave it there for the time being. Dej Badmus live in Lagos. Stay safe. Now, South Africa's government has instructed enterprises to have a very clear plan on how they will protect the health and safety of everyone in the workplace. Employees, suppliers, clients, all of them. Over 1 million people are expected to return to work this week, with some businesses and industries resuming operations across Africa's most industrialized economy. The Labour Ministry has outlined the minimum guidelines for employees expected to return to work under a level 4 lockdown. With the details, here's CGTN's Yolisa Jamela.
President Cyril Ramaphosa last week unveiled new alert levels of the lockdown, which will determine which sectors of the economy would be opened in certain areas. The 5 different levels determine the severity of the lockdown, with 5 being a hard lockdown and 1 being almost completely lifted. From the 1st of May, the country moved to level 4, and millions of people are expected to this week return to work under strict conditions.
Employers must take measures to protect the health and safety of everyone in their workplace. This includes employees of contractors, self-employed persons, and volunteers. The process starts with a risk assessment in the workplace and a clear plan to implement the measures contained in the direction.
And employers must provide each employee free of charge with at least 2 cloth masks to wear while at work or commuting. Social distancing must also be implemented in all common areas in and around the workplace to prevent crowding.
Workplaces must be arranged to ensure a minimum of 1.5 meters between workers. If this is not practicable, physical barriers must be erected and workers must be supplied free of charge with the appropriate personal protective equipment.
Employers are also required to report any diagnosis of COVID-19 at work to health and labor authorities. The minister also announced that employers must screen workers for COVID-19 symptoms at the time they return to work. And if any of them are showing any symptoms, that they must be isolated and arrangements be made for them to go for medical examination or for self-isolation.
The failure to comply fully with the OHSA, the Occupational Health and Safety Act, it's a criminal offense. Failure to take necessary measures to prevent the transmission of COVID-19 may result in the criminal prosecution.
To ensure compliance to these new regulations, labor inspectors will monitor and enforce the rules, and employers may be ordered to close business if they fail to abide by the guidelines. Yolisa Jamela for CGTN in Pretoria, South Africa.
Let's start our run through some company news. In Kenya, the country's flower sector is returning to business as usual slowly, as some flower farms in Naivasha, the heartland really of that enterprise, recently resumed business. This comes in the wake of the reopening of the Dutch auction and a number of other European supermarkets which shut down at the height of the pandemic. Now, the auction is reportedly the main market for Kenya's flower exports. Furthermore, an increase in cargo flights by Kenya Airways has seen farmers increase their shipments to Europe by at least 50% in the last 2 weeks. In South Africa, South African Airways is set to be restructured into an entirely new airline. Now, the new flag carrier will involve private and public capital, and the idea is to allow it to remain as a going concern by providing vital airlift capacity and trade connections within Africa and outside it. The new approach at SAA is going to be performance-based for pretty much everyone, management and employees, as they transition into a new enterprise, but there's no guarantee that all of the 5,000 jobs that it carries at the moment will be retained. In North Africa, Egyptian hotels will be able to open to local tourists, and they will be allowed to offer restaurant and day use services once more. Eating spots can now operate at about 25% capacity. That's the government-mandated cap until the end of May. The move aims to boost domestic tourism amid worldwide lockdowns that have abysmally affected the hospitality industry, which is one of Egypt's main sources of foreign currency earnings. Hotels are expected to accommodate guests at about 50% capacity from June. And finally, Berkshire Hathaway sold its entire stakes in the 4 largest American airlines in the month of April. The conglomerate held sizable positions in a number of airlines, including an 11% stake in Delta, 10% of American Airlines, 10% of Southwest, and 9% of United by the end of 2019. Airline stocks have been absolutely battered by the near collapse of US travel demand amidst this pandemic. That's a run through your company headlines. You're watching Global Business. Here's what's coming up shortly. Kenya Airways is converting grounded passenger planes into cargo freighters. And a global lockdown dries up cash remittances to Uganda. We'll look at the numbers when we come back.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business, only on CGTN.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN, see the difference. Welcome back to the program. Aviation is still our focus. Now, this pandemic, of course, has wreaked absolute havoc right across the global aviation industry. It's left a number of airlines right on the brink of collapse. And a bit to offset some of the effects of this crisis, Kenya's majority government-owned airline, Kenya Airways, has converted some of its grounded passenger planes into cargo freighters. CGTN's Beryl Oro has that story.
As demand for air travel disappears in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic, passenger airlines operating around the world are turning to cargo in order to produce fractional revenue to maintain operations. Kenya Airways has been hit hard by the cancellation of international flights that has left most of its passenger planes grounded. The airline now sees an opportunity in cargo business whose demand is steadily increasing.
We now converted the wide bodies to be able to do the freight to long-haul destinations like Europe, China, even the US, to bring in essentials and also to take vegetables to those places. This is it's probably the only revenue stream that we have currently, so that we can use that money also to continuously sustain ourselves and pay for the bills that we have today.
Kenya's flag carrier recently uplifted 40 tons of flowers and vegetables to some European nations that have started to ease tough lockdown restrictions that had kept people confined to their homes for more than a month.
The economy must keep on running. And that's why, in addition to the medical supplies, we are also having cargo flights. Many of you may have seen, recently we dispatched a Dreamliner 787 to London Heathrow to take fresh produce, which will bring the much required foreign exchange. This foreign exchange is what will help us in terms of making sure that we can actually pay for this kind of supplies. So I would like to thank Kenya Airways for facilitating this transport of both cargo and also medical supplies.
And with the uncertainty in the aviation sector expected to linger in the months ahead, airlines will have to adopt new strategies to remain in business post-COVID-19. Beryl Oro, CGTN.
Now, as this COVID-19 pandemic continues to spread across Africa, families that are heavily dependent on this end of the world on remittances from the diaspora are finding it rather hard to meet their daily expenses. They say they can't get funds from their relatives abroad because most of them are in lockdown and simply not working. CGTN's Hilary Ayesiga reports from Uganda.
Christine Nantambi is preparing lunch, but she's rationing the food because of a budget squeeze. Her father, based in South Africa, stopped sending money a month ago.
Ever since the lockdown got to Uganda, we've never received any money from him. Yeah, so all that we had, we used it.
The family has adjusted from having 3 meals to 1 meal a day. And they are not the only ones taking a hit from COVID-19. Lydia Luimbas is finding it hard to get help from her husband working in China.
He's not been working for now, and the places where he could reach and send money, they're no more. He cannot move.
Luimbas has been depending on remittances from China, but since the outbreak of COVID-19, that source of funding has since been cut off. She's now looking at her garden to put food on the table. Financial experts warn that the situation is likely to get worse as the virus continues to spread.
We know that a majority of Ugandans working in some of those countries are not documented. So they are not working. Many of them have actually fallen sick of COVID-19. We have received a lot of reports of many Ugandans who have fallen sick of COVID-19. They need to treat themselves. They cannot have enough money to spare to send to their relatives back in Uganda.
A recent report from the Bank of Uganda shows that remittances will fall from the projected $1.3 billion to $955 million by close of the 2019-2020 financial year. And the World Bank has also warned that global remittances will decline by 20% in 2020. But for Nantambi, not all hope is lost. She's hopeful that as major economies begin to ease restrictions, some people will soon get to work and remittances could flow again. Hilary Ayesiga, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
On to Tunisia now. Traders over there say revenues for them have fallen steeply as customers either stay away over health fears or they struggle to find the income to actually buy the groceries they need. The government over there has moved to improve sanitation in food markets amidst this pandemic. Here's CGTN's Adin Chouachi with the details.
Lazhar is a butcher at the central market in Tunis, which has remained open during the general lockdown. The 60-year-old man says the number of clients has decreased, causing a sudden drop in revenue.
People complain about inflation. Meat is available, but the clients are absent. The people's purchasing power is at the lowest level. Some citizens cannot afford to buy meat.
Slim sells vegetables in the same market. At times, like this holy month of Ramadan, it's usually packed with people. Now he says more than 40% of his clients no longer come to his stall.
The two main gates of the market are closed for sanitary reasons to avoid congestion. People are scared to come here. They want to avoid infection. That's why merchants are losing money.
Many consumers complain about soaring inflation and the fluctuating prices at this time of the year, which usually sees increased food consumption.
Prices are not stable. I'm a private sector employee who can afford to put food on the table, but the majority of consumers here just watch, then go home empty-handed or with basic food products.
The COVID-19 task force and the municipality of Tunis have put in place coronavirus prevention measures at the Ramadan food markets. The Ministry of Health has urged merchants and consumers to respect the sanitary measures to avoid infection. Tunisian authorities have asked traders to respect recommended food prices at the central market and in all regions across the country. They say the COVID-19 crisis has weakened people's purchasing power due to the economic and social repercussions of the pandemic. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
Egypt is borrowing about $400 million from the World Bank to fund the country's health insurance system. Now, this is a plan to provide health care to millions of Egyptians who are currently outside the current public health insurance model and cannot access the public health care system either. CGTN's Adel El-Marouki has the details.
The financial burdens Egypt's healthcare system has suffered from the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic has made the country request a 60% increase from the previous $250 million loan from the World Bank. Negotiations began before the pandemic. It's aimed to inject investments in Egypt's new inclusive healthcare insurance system.
That sum must be directed towards the stated purpose, which is the development of health insurance services, primarily to pay for underprivileged Egyptians who cannot afford to pay the premium.
Through this project, the $400 million facility the World Bank is providing will be also directed to develop the deteriorating public healthcare services. Experts are also recommending using that sum to fund programs tailored for medical staff.
In recent years, we have lost some of the most talented medical calibers. They left Egypt looking for more rewarding incomes in foreign countries. This is the biggest threat to the healthcare system. It's easy to purchase infrastructure, but to raise and train doctors is much more complicated.
With a struggling budget, Egypt is paying about $10 annually per capita for its current free healthcare service. The government says the inclusive healthcare insurance system will increase that to about $120. Egypt launched a new healthcare system in Port Said governorship last year. The World Bank's $400 million could help it complete the first phase, which includes the Suez Canal and the Sinai region. The government has divided the country into 6 phases to be completed by the year 2032, the last of which is the greater capital, Cairo. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
The World Bank estimates that about 40 million Nigerian adults are currently unbanked. Now, experts are arguing that this pandemic could be the prime opportunity to widen access to formal financial services. Here's CGTN's Deji Banwas exploring how this can be done through digital and mobile banking platforms.
Nothing better highlights Nigeria's financial inclusivity challenge than what is going on here. Senior government officials distributing raw cash to the poor as palliatives over the economic hardship caused by the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic. With most of the recipients not having bank accounts, the government had to resort to handing out raw cash, not minding the health implications at this period and the possibility of the recipients getting robbed of their money.
The beauty of electronic is we see it. This person gets 10,000 naira in their account. There is an electronic trail. Audit can happen. At this rate, the audit is how much was withdrawn and how much they said was distributed.
With widespread criticism trailing the process, the government has since stopped it and now says it is considering using bank accounts and telephone lines in making the transfers. Another process with its own challenges, since not all the intended recipients have bank accounts.
I don't see why we should not be able to onboard customers via USSD and, enlarge the pool. Over time, we would worry about how to get them to register their fingerprints and some of the other information that they cannot capture via this means.
Experts say the situation simply presents the government with the best opportunity to develop the country's mobile money platform and digital pay.
The central bank has been driving this process for some time, but we haven't actually get to where we should be. But this COVID-19 crisis, our pandemic, has made it even more imperative now to step up or to scale up what we are doing in this area.
Imagine every Nigerian had a mobile money wallet today. The whole issue around palliatives and getting it across to everybody would not even come up.
In December last year, the central bank issued licenses to 15 mobile operators as part of its financial inclusion drive. But with the mobile money operators relying on agents to facilitate their services, it's been difficult for the agents to work as a result of the lockdown imposed by the government.
The central bank came out to say that if you are a financial institution under their regulation, they listed out different categories. Come and get this exemption letter. I do think that for mobile money platforms, they should not shy away from this. As long as you are a registered mobile money operator, please reach out to them, get this letter and pass it across to your agents, because now more than ever, Nigerians need these services.
Some experts have also suggested this is an opportunity to bypass the agents and reach the customers directly. But others have warned that illiteracy level at rural areas and poor network infrastructure could make that idea unattainable at the moment. Deji Badmos, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
An increasing number of countries are making it mandatory for their citizens to wear face masks while in public as they try and stop the spread of COVID-19. But for hundreds of millions of low-income earners in a continent like Africa, this represents them with a rather stark choice: put food on the table or go without a mask and raise the risk of infection or worse. Here's CGTN's Wilkista Nyambo with the story of a designer in Kenya who's giving out these masks for free.
Deep in the heart of Kibra, an informal settlement in Nairobi, is a sewing machine that hardly ever stops. It hums day and night, churning out clothes that keep this team busy. Theirs is a labor of love, a mission of mercy. They're making masks to distribute to the local community for free. The masks were David Avido's brainchild. A fashion designer, he knew nothing about mask making until Kenya reported its first case of COVID-19. As the rest of the country scrambled to purchase protective gear, he watched as his neighbors simply went without. The masks were too expensive for them, so he decided to start making masks for them. The government of Kenya has issued a directive making it mandatory for everyone to wear a mask when they step out in public. However, the cost of these masks means they are beyond the reach of many, and this is why the work that this designer is doing is so important.
People back here in the slums, most of them earn up to maybe like 300 shillings, 400 shillings or 500 shillings in a day. And these same people, they have a family to feed. And also, aside from having a family to feed, they also have other expenditures like paying rents, taking their kids to school.
Through trial and error and research, Avido quickly learned what goes into making a good mask. While the effectiveness of cloth masks has been questioned, the Center for Disease Control advises that cloth face coverings fashioned from household items can be used as an additional voluntary public health measure. Today, Avido sews 2 layers and leaves a pocket where users can add a serviette as a filter. And the more he makes, the more word goes round about the designer giving out masks. On most days, locals simply walk into his workshop to collect the masks.
Avido huwa namuona Instagram.
I usually see Avido on Instagram. So now that this has happened and we need to be safe, I realized that I should also protect myself. We can't take this lightly, and since he's giving these masks for free, it's easy to access them.
Since he started, Avido has made and given out over 7,200 masks. Uweza, a local non-governmental organization, has been supplying him with fabric, but he's now running out of the material. And he fears that unless he receives more fabric, he will have to give up this initiative. But with hundreds lining up for masks at his door, Avido is determined to make the best of what he has. This is his contribution to the fight against COVID-19.
Giving the mask to the community, to me, it's just like also another way to be able to get in touch with them and also advise them how they're supposed to prevent themselves, from the virus, because I normally tell them like giving them the mask doesn't mean they're like 100% like, protected from the virus. That is just like 5% or 10% or 15%.
And as long as he has some fabric, Avido's sewing machine will continue to hum late into the night, a hopeful sound in the midst of a pandemic. Wilkes Anyabwa, CGTN.
Across the border in Tanzania, a designer over there called Tamara Ringo has always loved fashion and entrepreneurship. Her products, in fact, with African print have attracted many clients. But this pandemic has shifted her focus to instead focus on helping against the fight against this pathogen. CGTN's Daniel Kijo has a story.
Saba Collection was launched a year ago and has sold African-inspired items across Tanzania. But now the team is trying to ease the face mask shortage in Tanzania by producing them. The founder, Tamara Ringo, says that at first she struggled to get a market.
We got a lot of criticism, and it's because people didn't understand, like, how can a mask be washable? How can you reuse the mask?
But despite the ability to reduce the chances of COVID-19 spreading, Tamara is clear that the masks they're producing are not medical grade. The Dar es Salaam Regional Commissioner is urging people to wear masks in public, or if they can't afford that, a face covering instead. But while masks may stop carriers from passing it on, there is still debate over whether they are the most effective tool to beat an outbreak. The government has taken coronavirus mitigation measures like limiting movement, closing schools, and cancelling gatherings, and asking everyone to start wearing masks. With a box of 20 masks now priced at $30, most Tanzanians are improvising.
We're told to keep changing masks every 4 hours. I can't afford to frequently change masks. I decide to use this cloth to protect myself even better.
I bought my mask at a tailor for only 50 cents. I decided to use this mask because I won't lose it easily like the shop ones. I can just wash it, iron it, and reuse it.
People like Tamara believe that any face mask, even a homemade one, is better than nothing.
We need to do this more to help people, though it's business as well. So it's a mixture of everything. So we are trying to help the society, at the same time we are trying to make a bread on our plate.
Tamara has already sold more than 3,000 masks over the last month. She says producing alternative masks will help decrease the demands for professional medical-grade single-use masks needed by medics, and might be another useful innovation in the battle to beat coronavirus. Daniel Kijo, CGTN, Dar es Salaam.
You're watching Global Business Africa. It's time for another break. Here's what's coming up. As Italy starts to emerge from a 2-month lockdown, we'll look at what shape the country's economy is in. And the WHO is now warning about a spike in alcohol-related disorders as a result of this pandemic.
Holding guns. Machine guns from police forces toward the protesters.
Were you worried about your life at that particular time? Not at all.
What is your assessment of the state of the continent today?
Africa has the potential to power itself.
Excuse me.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads.
we celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back to the program. Let's move further afield now, away from the African continent. Italy is emerging from its 2-month-long lockdown. Construction sites and factories got back to work on Monday, the 4th of May. In the meantime, restaurants will reopen for takeaway services, but bars and ice cream parlors will remain shut. People are still grappling with how to get the wheels turning again without sparking a second wave of infections that may overwhelm the country's public healthcare system. Italy's COVID-19 death toll is now second only to the United States. Italy's economy, which is the Eurozone's third largest, is expected to contract by more than in any other year since the global depression in the 1930s. Lockdowns are easing right across Europe after signs that the pandemic might be slowing down. Even hard-hit Italy, as we've just mentioned, is allowing people to stroll in parks and visit their relatives. CGTN's Rahul Pathak has the details from Madrid.
Lockdown restrictions continue to ease right across Europe. In Germany, religious gatherings suspended since mid-March have allowed churches to open their doors once again. Sunday saw the 772-year-old Cologne Cathedral hold its first public service since March 14th. The World Heritage Site Cathedral normally attracts 20,000 visitors a day. Sunday saw 122 worshippers filling the pews in compliance with social distancing rules. Well, meanwhile, here in Spain, from Monday, certain small businesses will be allowed to reopen, such as hair salons and car mechanics, in an effort to revive the ailing economy. Also, over the weekend, Spaniards were afforded a little bit more freedom, with adults allowed to go out for a jog or to go walking in the early mornings or late evenings. Also on Monday, professional athletes will be allowed to resume training whilst observing certain guidelines. Athletes of a less professional nature were also allowed out in Spain this weekend. Surfers in San Sebastian and Gran Canaria catching their first waves in 49 days.
I think the people is happy. It wasn't difficult to maintain the distance because in surfing you are not supposed to get next to each other. So, I mean, I think people is happy. I'm happy. We are tired. We are not in shape, especially older people, but it was a nice day.
Meanwhile, in Italy, business owners were preparing for the partial reopening of their businesses, where takeaway services would be allowed to operate. This comes off the back of an increase in the daily death toll, mainly in the Lombardy region during the weekend. Over in Austria, one of the countries least affected by the coronavirus, with less than 600 deaths, their capital city, Vienna, has allowed shops to reopen. The country has also lifted travel restrictions and has now permitted gatherings of up to 10 people at a time. European countries are hoping to gradually get their economies back up to speed with the easing of confinement and lockdown restrictions. In the coming days and weeks, they will also pay close attention to the effect this has on any spike in both infections and deaths across the continent. Rahul Pathak, CGTN, Madrid.
China's annual Labor Day holiday doesn't mark the end of the COVID-19 pandemic, but it's certainly an opportunity for people to get out of their houses after being confined there for months. Despite large tourism spending, experts say there simply won't be enough consumption to salvage the economic performance this year. CGTN's Li Jianhua explains.
The first stop for many tourists craving some authentic Cantonese food in southern China. After spending 3 months indoors, people are now venturing outside, enjoying one of China's national holidays. But the number of those actually on holiday is short of expectations.
Last year during the holiday in May, there were long queues even around this time. Now we see the number of people is declining. It's very different from last year. Grandview Mall has given us some preferential policies, and my company has created some new dishes. I believe the sector of food and beverages will recover soon.
China's GDP growth in the first quarter dropped by nearly 7% year-on-year, the first recorded GDP decrease since 1992. With the ease of travel restrictions among several major Chinese cities, logistics and consumption are slowly recovering.
The so-called pent-up consumption and growth during the holiday is unlikely to happen. Quarantine policies are different in low, middle, and high-risk areas. These areas are scattered all over China. The levels of work and production resumption are also different. The incomes for the general public were also severely reduced. That's why pent-up consumption is unlikely.
If there were no COVID-19, this area would be packed with tourists. The pandemic has indeed taken a toll on China's economy, and it might be quite a while until it fully recovers, but some are looking at the glass as being half full. The head of Grandview Mall is working to transform himself into an online celebrity to boost sales via live streaming. He says his company has to jump on the bandwagon right now.
I regard the pandemic as an opportunity for companies, including Grandview Mall. It's true our revenue and customers saw a decline of up to 70%, but it will motivate us to develop new skills to change. It makes us realize the old ways are not working. Do we sit and wait, or do we make a change? No matter what, we need to move on.
The pandemic, which is coming under control slowly, might shake up the modes of business operation in China and possibly around the world. Li Jianhua, CGTN, Guangzhou.
The World Health Organization is warning that this pandemic and all the lockdowns it's triggered around the world could actually lead to a rise in alcohol-related disorders and mental health issues too. But some British retailers say they've seen a spike in alcohol sales, and they argue the drinks can help people socialise. CGTN's Nawi Jabakil has that story from London.
A drink with friends in a pub or bar. That may seem a distant memory for some during the coronavirus lockdown, but the World Health Organization is urging people across Europe to avoid drinking too much alcohol while they're stuck indoors. According to the WHO, alcohol is responsible for 3 million deaths a year worldwide. A third of those occur in Europe. On average, the region has the highest alcohol intake and the highest number of drinkers in the population, as well as most deaths caused by alcohol. Here in the UK, Alcoholics Anonymous usually has about 5,000 face-to-face meetings a week to help problem drinkers. COVID-19 has stopped those, so support has shifted online and over the phone.
The number inquired about meetings has gone up by over 300% in the course of this outbreak. But that again is just people trying to find ways to engage because the traditional methods of engagement are not readily available.
On the other hand, businesses that rely on selling alcohol are also facing their own challenges. Michael Campbell is the founder of Breton Rosé and says an uptick in business recently has been bittersweet given the global health crisis.
On one hand, you've got restaurants on trade, restaurants, bars, etc. And that business has gone to zero, so it's dropped by 100%. So what the industry has had to do is to be a little bit innovative, and that requires refocusing the efforts into off-trade, so bottle shops, and then direct to consumers. And that's where we've seen huge spikes in volumes.
With no clear vaccine for COVID-19, lockdowns may become a more normal part of our lives in the future. Public health officials say we should moderate how much we drink, and the wider alcohol industry, like so many, is being transformed by this global pandemic. Nawi Jabakil, CGTN, London.
All right, then a quick run through commodity prices here for you. So Brent crude, at least the July contract, is down by nearly 6% so far this quarter. trying to figure out where demand is heading is the real headache for a lot of traders at the moment, especially after April saw output rise strongly among OPEC members. Remember that tiff between Saudi Arabia and Russia, and then followed by production cuts of about 9.7 million barrels a day, which started this month. So the question then becomes, has demand bottomed out, and what is the extent of the surplus remaining even after these cuts are in place? Those are all questions in search of an answer at this point in time. Here's what's coming up shortly. Plastic pickers in Tunisia are suffering enormous losses thanks to COVID-19 lockdowns. Their stories coming up shortly.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. And no one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back. There are over 20,000 plastic pickers in Tunisia. This vulnerable group of informal workers has essentially lost its main source of revenue ever since the COVID-19 pandemic landed on the shores of the North African state. The crisis has also affected hundreds of companies that tend to buy plastic waste from these pickers as well. These are their stories on Grassroots tonight.
Arbi is a 39-year-old plastic picker in Tunisia who usually works for up to 12 hours a day. His morning shift begins at 6 a.m. His evening shift ends at 11 p.m. The father of four says the coronavirus crisis has reduced his already small income by nearly half.
I walk for more than 30 miles to pick up plastic bottles, but I can no longer work in some areas due to the lockdown or at night due to the curfew. The coronavirus is not a priority, though working is risky. I just think of the rent, the bills, and of putting food on the table.
The restaurant, cafes and companies where Arbi used to collect plastic waste have been closed since the beginning of the general lockdown. Consequently, the material is no longer available in the streets and public bins of Tunis.
All this plastic is worth less than $6 while it took me 5 hours to collect. I'm tired, but I'm proud. The only inconvenience is that I have to walk further to find plastic because it's no longer available in many business and popular areas because people are at home.
Nizar rents a space in downtown Tunis where he stores tons of plastic bottles which he is not able to sell to the recycling factories.
In this period of lockdown, I can't afford to buy plastic or even get it for free from all the plastic pickers because all the plastic recycling factories are closed. I don't have enough money or space. I only accept from those I know whom I cannot abandon. I hope this crisis will end soon.
Arbi dreams of buying a motorcycle to pull his trailer of plastic. He also hopes the state will give the country's waste pickers better protection from health risks during and after the COVID-19 pandemic. Walking for miles and pushing the cart under the sun, especially during the fasting month of Ramadan, is a tiring physical activity. Yet the number of plastic and waste pickers is expected to rise in Tunisia this summer due to the social and economic impact of the coronavirus crisis on the vulnerable population. Abdel Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
Now, the gradual easing of South Africa's nationwide lockdown does bring a small glimmer of hope for one of Johannesburg's most famous pubs. The Jolly Roger is well known for its pizza, among other offerings. It had, however, turned to crowdfunding in order to pay staff salaries, but the business is still running some pretty heavy losses. CGTN's Julie Shire filed this report.
Smoke rising from the chimney of Joburg's famous Jolly Roger, a sight not seen since late March when business ground to a halt. Determined to stay afloat, the pub used crowdfunding to raise over $7,000 to pay more than 30 employees.
We decided to go the crowdfunding route, which worked very well. We made target, we actually over target. And we're just using that money just to keep the staff members going. We're not giving it to them all at once. I also told them they shouldn't pay their clothing accounts. They should really use the money for bare necessities like food and buying power.
We've also looked at developing a branded mask, but in material, just to keep everyone hoping, and that from what we sell from that would also be put into a fund to accommodate staff. We've got 26 staff inside the Jolly Roger, but we have another few people. We have labourers, etc., that do all our maintenance for us.
With the ban on food deliveries lifted, the pub has reopened its kitchen. Isaac Dube, the chef behind the pizzas, has 5 children and is grateful to be back at work.
To stay home for a long time, so it's too hard. But what can we say? We've accepted it because there's a law. We have to keep ourselves safe. We've got paid for April month so that we managed to buy food and to pay rent for that month. But for this month, we don't know what are we going to do.
But the Jolly's woes are far from over. Most of its $50,000 monthly turnover comes from liquor sales, which is still prohibited. Attempts to access state relief funds has been fruitless so far.
I'm waiting for UIF to get back to us. I'm waiting for SAFT, which is the Oppenheimer Fund, but which is a long-term loan. It's not money that you get for nothing. It's a 5-year interest-free loan. I wake up every morning at 2 o'clock, and then I force myself to go back to sleep because I don't know what's going to happen.
This iconic pub is hoping the soft lifting of restrictions will offset some of its losses, but that will depend whether there's an appetite for takeaways. Julie Shire, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Makes you hungry, doesn't it? Let's make a quick run through the currencies here for you. So we saw the latest PMI data from South Africa coming out today. That reading crashed to an all-time low in the month of April. Some respondents essentially indicating there was zero output during the country's 5-week lockdown. You're going to see a lot more of that as more PMI data comes through. Kenya's April PMI data, for instance, is due on the 6th of May. That's this week, Wednesday. It'll make for interesting, if rather grim, reading. Kenya's Finance Ministry also exploring debt relief measures with bilateral lenders and IFIs, but there's no deal on the table for that as yet. On the debt auction side, there's a 5-year, near $500 million note that will be coming to market for auction on the 6th of May as well. That's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. As always, we'd like to hear your thoughts on the content you've heard on this program and seen in the last hour. There are many ways to get your thoughts back to us, all of them on your screens right now. I'm Ramah Nyang in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Thank you for your company in the last hour. The news continues on CGTN.